Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take, well, some of the world's most complicated stacks of sources, from ancient poetry to modern political manifestos.
And we try to distill them into something you can really grab onto.
Exactly. The knowledge you need fast. And today we are tackling a really magnificent, though I have to say at first glance, a pretty jarring juxtaposition.
It is a study in contrasts, for sure. On one side of our table, we have the enduring legacy of Homer.
The Iliad and the Odyssey.
The textual foundations that, really define Western concepts of heroism, of war, and the search for home.
And then on the other side, we have this seismic intellectual event from 20th century Egypt.
Taha Hussein's fierce, passionate defense of his nation's identity.
These two worlds, the mythic ancient journey and this very modern struggle for cultural self-definition, they seem totally separate.
You'd think so.
But our mission today is to synthesize them. We're going to examine how both stacks of sources, separated by millennia, are actually grappling with the same core questions.
Questions like, what truly defines an identity? Is that identity tied forever to a physical location?
And what is the profound tension that gets set up between perceived opposites? Whether it's East and West or Achilles' brute strength versus Odysseus's cunning intelligence.
We're basically using the ancient framework of complementary opposites to try and illuminate a very modern debate about cultural belonging.
It's a deep dive into the nature of permanence itself. Okay, so let's unpack this. I think we have to start with Homer. For, 3 millennia, these two epic poems have defined the Western literary tradition.
Absolutely have.
And they seem to do it by defining two fundamentally different paths to being a hero.
Precisely. We should probably start with the Iliad. It's generally dated to the 8th century BC.
Right.
And it's a very compressed narrative. It's not the whole Trojan War, which is a common misconception. It's really just a few intense weeks during that decade-long conflict.
The driving engine of the whole thing is the wrath, the menace of Achilles.
Exactly. Its subject is glory, honor, and ultimately death. It sets the standard for what we think of as tragic heroism.
Then, a little bit later, maybe late 8th or early 7th century BC, we get the Odyssey.
And the shift is immediate. The whole focus moves away from the battlefield. This is the story of Odysseus' difficult return home, his Nostos.
So it's not an epic about war. It's an epic about what happens after the war.
It's about picking up the pieces. And the contrast in the protagonists is so immediate and, you have to think, so deliberate.
Let's break that down. Achilles, the hero of the Iliad, how do we define him?
He's defined by his physical prowess, his martial ability. He is the ultimate man of action. What he seeks is eternal glory kleos through these decisive, often incredibly violent deeds.
So the Iliad, in essence, it elevates the heroism of the body.
Yes. It's about what the body can achieve in its prime in battle.
And Odysseus stands in powerful contrast to that.
A complete contrast. Sure, he's a capable fighter, we see that, but that's not his defining characteristic.
Yeah.
The thing that separates him from every other Achaean warrior is his resourcefulness, his intelligence, and above all, his cunning. He's polytropos, the man of many ways, of many turns.
He's driven less by that hot-headed rage and more by perseverance? Calculated thinking?
Exactly, the calculated use of the mind. And the Odyssey does something really fascinating here intellectually. It democratizes nobility.
What do you mean by that?
It emphasizes the nobility, or you could even say the generosity, of the mind or the soul. It places that above sheer physical strength or an aristocratic bloodline.
So it's a story where being smart and being patient are actually proven to be superior tools.
Superior for survival, for governance, for rebuilding a kingdom. Certainly superior to the short-fused rage of an Achilles, which is incredibly destructive.
And if the heroes are opposites, then the themes of the poems diverge just as dramatically.
Completely. The Iliad is, at its heart, a meditation on what is worth dying for.
Right. It's all about these grand concepts like glory, honor, fate, the brutal reality of death. It is almost relentlessly focused on external, immediate conflict.
Whereas the Odyssey, it flips the question. It asks, what should we live for outside of war?
A much more difficult question in some ways.
A much more human question. Its central themes are homecoming, Nostos, which is, way more complicated than just getting on a boat and sailing back.
It's about reintegrating.
And it's about loyalty, which has to be tested over 2 decades. It's about identity, which can be disguised and lost. And crucially, it's about Xenia proper, guest friendship, and hospitality.
So it's a deep dive into human endurance, what it takes to survive, and maybe more importantly, to maintain a moral center when you're surrounded by chaos.
That's it, exactly. And, Aristotle, when he looked at them, he saw this. He didn't see them as opposites that cancel each other out.
No, he saw them as two sides of the same coin.
Complementary contrasts, yeah. Both necessary for the totality of life.
And the structure of the poems themselves, the way they end, really hammers this home, doesn't it?
It does. The Iliad concludes in this moment of profound tragedy. It's the funeral of Hector.
Which foreshadows the eventual destruction of his city, Troy, and the death of Achilles himself. It ends in death and sorrow.
It anticipates the structure of classical tragedy.
But the Odyssey, it resolves in reunion. It's a restoration of order, a successful defense of the home. It ends with the marriage bed secure and the hero finally recognized.
It's the structure of comedy, or at least a story of restoration.
And that contrast in mood is, well, it's highly instructive. I remember one source we looked at described the Iliad as a raging maelstrom of fire and blood.
Loud, frenetic, confusing, it's sensory overload focused on destruction.
While that same source called the Odyssey a lit fuse.
A lit fuse, I love that. It's subtle, it's extremely sensitive to human mental function. It's all about the slow psychological buildup of tension.
What does that subtle narrative choice tell us about the audience at the time? That shift from the maelstrom to the lit fuse.
I think it suggests a real intellectual maturity in the audience. They're being asked to engage with a different kind of story, a different kind of tension.
Not just who's going to win the next spear fight.
Exactly. The dramatic tension now comes from not knowing who is telling the truth, or when recognition will finally occur. The story of the lit fuse is about the internal landscape, the cunning you need to navigate political dangers at home and these, mythic dangers abroad.
So that shift proves that the ancient Greeks valued more than just strength.
They valued the strength to fight, yes, but also the intelligence to endure and to rebuild. Hashtag 1.2 literary techniques and narrative depth in the Odyssey.
That shift from external fighting to internal navigation, it's reflected so brilliantly in the narrative complexity of the Odyssey. It's a much more layered poem.
It really is. And crucially, Odysseus himself undergoes genuine spiritual growth. He is not the same man at the end of the poem as he was at the beginning.
He certainly isn't.
Yeah.
When we first meet him in his flashback stories, the Apologoi.
The stories he tells the Phoenicians.
Right. He's often brash, he's overconfident, prone to gloating, which, frankly, is what gets him into half his trouble.
Think about his arrogance when he's escaping the Cyclops, Polyphemus. He has to shout out his real name.
He can't resist.
He can't. And that single act of hubris leads directly to Poseidon's endless vengeance and years of delay.
But the journey strips that arrogance away from him.
Completely. By the time he finally washes up on Ithaca, he has learned caution. He trusts no one. He acts only after deep deliberation. He's evolved from a reckless adventurer into a thoughtful, strategic planner.
And this spiritual maturation is underscored by that recurring thematic contrast between order and disorder.
Yes, this is a key theme. Ithaca, Odysseus' home, represents civilization. It's the place of agriculture, of handiwork, of defined social structures, and mutual accountability.
And you're supposed to contrast that sharply with the worlds he travels through.
Very sharply. Take the land of the lotus eaters. The plants grow freely, without labor, and what's the result?
Apathy. The loss of the desire for home.
They forget their Nostos. Or, the ultimate example, the island of the Cyclops, Polyphemus.
He's the perfect personification of anti-civilization.
Absolutely. He lives in a cave, he doesn't farm, he doesn't trade, and he actively, violently denies the sacred obligation of Xenia. He exists in this state of chaotic self-sufficiency.
These realms are threats to the hero precisely because they represent environments that undermine all that human effort and order.
The very things Odysseus must restore in Ithaca.
And the fact that the Cyclops violates Xenia so spectacularly, he eats his guests.
It's the ultimate violation.
That's why Odysseus' blinding of him, which is brutal, is completely justified in the moral economy of the epic. It's about restoring a broken social contract.
Precisely. And the restoration of that moral contract is the engine of the entire second half of the poem. And the most brilliant technique used to build that tension is the extended motif of disguise and recognition.
The anagnorisis.
Yes. Thanks to the goddess Athena, Odysseus spends weeks on his own island disguised as this ragged old beggar.
And this disguise isn't just for his safety, is it? It's a core part of his strategy.
It's absolutely crucial. The disguise allows him to gather intelligence, to assess the true state of his household,
and to test the loyalty of everyone around him.
His swineherd Eumaeus, his dog Argos, and eventually, most importantly, his wife Penelope. For the audience, this creates this profound, dramatic irony.
We know the king is right there.
We know. We're watching him observe the moral decay of his own court, while everyone else remains blind to who he is.
The recognition scenes are masterful. Each one builds the tension a little more and carries a different emotional weight.
They really do. The recognition by his son Telemachus is strategic. They form an alliance to fight the suitors.
But the recognition by his old dog, Argos, that's just heartbreakingly emotional.
The dog sees him, wags its tail, and then dies happy, having seen his master one last time. It's devastating.
And the recognition by Penelope, which comes last of all, that's the ultimate climax.
It's the moment of restoration for the family unit, and it's required before he can take the final steps to restore his rule. All of this narrative tension, this lit fuse, is focused on the ultimate test, the confrontation with the suitors.
The suitors are the perfect, necessary foils, aren't they? I mean, they aren't powerful external invaders from another land.
No, they're internal corruption.
The rot from within.
They are moral bankruptcy made manifest. They violate every single sacred rule of Xenia. They occupy the home, they devour the wealth, they abuse the servants, and they plot to murder the heir, Telemachus.
So their punishment, their mass slaughter, it isn't just vengeance.
No, it's a required act of restoring order and justice to the entire social structure of Ithaca. The poem cannot conclude until the moral and political economy of the island is stable again.
So we have this incredible transition from the external battle of bodies and rage in the Iliad to the internal psychological battle of identity, loyalty, and restoration of Odyssey.
And when you put them together, it becomes so clear why these two poems covered the totality of life for the Greeks. How to gain glory in action, and how to survive, endure, and rebuild through cunning.
That focus on structure and unity brings us, I think, very naturally to the physical foundations of the epics, specifically to the famous scholarly war known as the Homeric question.
Oh, yes!
This long-running debate, it peaked dramatically in the 19th century, and it concerned, well, everything. Authorship, chronology, the exact relationship between these two massive works.
The 19th century was completely obsessed with this, and it's because you have the rise of scientific history and philology as disciplines. Scholars felt they absolutely had to separate the idea of a single genius author, Homer, from this messy collective oral tradition. The core question was, are these the unified work of one genius, or are they just a collection of much shorter, independent folk songs that were later stitched together by editors?
And that's the classic Unitarian versus analyst split, right?
Exactly. The analysts, people like Karl Lachmann, they performed what was basically intellectual surgery on the texts.
What do you mean?
Well, Lachmann famously claimed the Iliad was originally only 16 independent lays, or short songs, that were later compiled and enlarged. He saw passages, particularly those that seemed to pause the action for reflection, as later additions, later interpolations.
So the analysts basically saw the poems as great collaborative folk art, edited over centuries, and often not very perfectly.
Yes. And their opponents, the Unitarians, they argued for the clear, overarching design that we appreciate today. They insisted that the architectural integrity of both poems couldn't possibly have survived centuries of random addition.
So where have we landed on that today? What's the modern consensus?
Well, what's fascinating is that the modern consensus is somewhere in the middle. We certainly recognize that the poems relied heavily on pre-existing oral traditions, on formulaic language, on materials from the epic cycle. But nearly all scholars now agree that both the Iliad and the Odyssey possess a definitive, unified overall design. They weren't just random songs strung together. There was a single powerful mind guiding the composition of each.
Okay, a powerful mind for each. But were those two powerful minds the same person?
Probably not. And that's the other part of the consensus. Despite the unity within each poem, the majority view today is that the Iliad and the Odyssey were likely composed by different authors.
And the evidence for that.
It's compelling. There are differences in narrative style, in vocabulary, in theological emphasis, even in geographical perspective.
It's almost as if the author of the second poem, the Odyssey, had read the first one and decided, okay, I am steering clear of that territory.
That is the exact conclusion of what's called Monroe's Law, named after David Monroe.
And the law suggests
that the Odyssey was composed with a conscious awareness of the Iliad and deliberately avoided referencing any major incident that was already recounted in the earlier work, which again reinforces this idea of contrastive complementarity.
Not everyone was so generous about the differences, though. I love the critique by the ancient critic. the one we call pseudo-Longinus.
It's a great example of ancient literary gossip.
His explanation was, let's say, a bit unscholarly.
It was. Pseudo-Longinus argued that the differences between the works suggested that the Iliad poet was in his prime, full of vigor and fire, but no, that he suffered from senility by the time he wrote the Odyssey.
So he's saying the gentler, more subtle focus of the Odyssey is a bug, not a feature.
Exactly. He completely missed the point that the subtlety of the Odyssey was a deliberate narrative choice, not a symptom of a failing mind. Hashtag 2.2, the search for the real Ithaca, Gnostis in reality.
Okay, so now we move from the abstract authorship question to the literal ground beneath the story. The physical search for Homer's locations has been, well, it's been immensely successful in some areas.
Hugely successful. Schliemann finding Troy, Mycena.
But when we try to trace Odysseus' travels, especially those fantastic stories he tells the Phaeacians in books 9 through 12, the geography gets very, very slippery.
It does, because these places, the land of the dead, Scylla and Charybdis, the island of the Cyclops, they're supernatural or fantastic. They don't appear in any reliable historical or geographical record outside the poem.
So they're a literary construct.
Designed to test the hero's mind, not his navigation skills. And the ancient world recognized this difficulty. This debate about whether these places were real is incredibly old.
You had the euhemerists who tried to rationalize them.
Yes, and trying to pin them on a map. Identifying the land of the Lotus Eaters as a headland in Libya or the Phaeacian island of Syria as modern Corcyra.
But the truly defining skepticism, the really academic viewpoint, came from Eratosthenes, writing back in the 3rd century BC.
He crystallized the professional view that Homer was primarily a poet and an entertainer, not a geographer or a historian.
Eratosthenes' quote on this is just a classic. It's such a wonderfully cynical dismissal of the entire geographical quest.
It's the ultimate mic drop. He famously said, "You will find the scene of the wanderings of Odysseus when you find the cobbler who sewed up the bag of the winds."
In other words, never.
Never. It's a fool's errand. You're looking for a mythical place in the real world. And today, the vast majority of classical scholars agree with Eratosthenes. They argue that trying to map the Odyssey is useless. It's like trying to locate the hut of the 7 dwarves.
And yet, the destination, Ithaca, is supposed to be real. Odysseus describes it with such profound emotion.
Oh, the passage is beautiful. "My island lies further to the west. It is a rugged land, but good for raising sons. And I myself, I know no sweeter sight on earth than a man's own native country."
It's so evocative and yet so deeply problematic for geographers.
Deeply. The modern island of Ithaca bears the name, but extensive archaeological searches have failed to locate a credible Bronze Age palace that matches the description.
But more importantly, Homer's own geographical description of Ithaca's location, its relation to the other Ionian islands like Sani and Delition.
It's inconsistent with the modern island cluster. It just doesn't fit. So it seems Homer was either geographically confused or he was describing a place that no longer exists in its ancient form.
And that very inconsistency is the launchpad for our next fascinating segment. The modern, controversial, and I think deeply compelling theory proposed by Robert Biddlestone.
In his 2005 book, Odysseus Unbound.
Biddlestone's work is just a wonderful example of what can happen when highly intelligent amateurs look at a problem that conventional scholarship has basically given up on.
He's part of a great tradition. He wasn't a classicist, he was a British management consultant, but like Schliemann digging up Troy or Michael Ventris cracking Linear B.
He brought a fresh, outsider's perspective, combined with sharp analytical skills, to the problem of Ithaca.
And his central hypothesis, which is this brilliant blend of philology and geology, is radical.
He says that the Peliki Peninsula, the western part of the modern island of Cephalonia, was ancient Ithaca.
And the reason we can't find it now is because of a geological catastrophe.
That's the key.
Biddlestone theorized that the narrow, low-lying isthmus that currently connects Peliki to the rest of Cephalonia was once an open sea channel. This would have made Peliki a distinct island that fits Homer's descriptions far better than modern Ithaca.
And this channel, he argued, filled in over time due to successive earthquakes and massive land movement.
Exactly.
Wait, okay. If this happened thousands of years ago, how on earth did he even begin to prove that a sea channel existed where there's dry land now? He must have needed an ancient clue.
He did. And the crucial piece of philological evidence came from the 2nd century BC geographer Strabo.
Why does Strabo matter so much?
Because he was writing long after Homer, but before all knowledge of the Bronze Age geography was lost. And Strabo's geography contained this very specific passage describing Cephalonia as having a low isthmus that is often submerged from sea to sea.
Wow. So even 200 years before Christ, people were observing that this strip of land was precarious.
And that it had been known to be underwater, suggesting it had functioned as two separate islands at times. That is a powerful textual link.
It's a smoking gun.
It is, especially when you bring in the hard science. A geologist, John Underhill, was brought in to investigate the isthmus, and he confirmed that Cephalonia sits directly on one of the most active and unstable fault lines in the world.
Where the African and Eurasian tectonic plates collide.
Right. This area experiences massive geological uplift and is prone to violent landscape-altering earthquakes.
Underhill described the isthmus connecting Paliki as a geologic mess. What does that mean in practical terms?
It means the land there is not solid bedrock. It's composed of loose rockfall and avalanche debris. His team found these zigzagging ravines up to 300 feet deep.
Which is entirely consistent with massive landslips and rock avalanches filling in a former sea channel over the millennia.
The isthmus is essentially a giant pile of earthquake-generated rubble.
And we have modern context for this, don't we? The devastating 1953 earthquake in the Ionian Islands showed the sheer scale of uplift and landscape alteration that's possible in just a single day.
It provides the mechanism. It shows how a sea channel could, slowly or even very quickly, be buried by landmass. And the research that's come out since Biddlestone's book has significantly bolstered the theory.
What have they found?
In one study, they drilled a 400-foot borehole right on the isthmus. Now, if it were solid land, they should have hit bedrock.
But they didn't.
They found only loose rockfall for 400 feet.
That is incredibly strong evidence for the filled-in channel hypothesis. Did they also manage to physically locate where the former sea channel would have been?
They did. A survey by the Greek Geological Institute pinpointed a submerged marine valley in the area, which is precisely where the sea channel Strabos Channel would have been before the land movements choked it off.
So the geography, which classical scholars had dismissed as useless fantasy,
turns out to have been an accurate description of a real place that was physically altered by a natural disaster.
it vindicates Homer as a poet who relied on authentic geographic tradition.
It does, and Biddlestone followed up on the archaeological side as well. On the Paliki Peninsula, overlooking Argostoli Bay, he located a small hill named Castelli. And this site had ruins and local toponymy pointing toward a fortification,
And they found Bronze Age pottery fragments there.
making it a highly plausible, geographically fitting candidate for Odysseus's palace, the very thing the modern island of Ithaki was always missing.
The theory is just. It's so beautiful because it merges the literary with the scientific. It suggests that the hero's home, the physical anchor of his identity, and his quest for Nostos, was never stable.
It was literally ripped apart by tectonic forces and then slowly stitched back together by geological catastrophe, obscuring the poet's truth.
That's truly mind-bending. The idea that the very ground beneath a civilization can shift violently enough to rewrite geography. It fundamentally challenges our perception of stability and permanence. We assume our place in the world is fixed.
But what happens when the very notion of a fixed location is dependent on geology?
That instability, the geographical anchor, raises a really important question about the stability of any identity that is tied to location.
Which provides us with a surprisingly perfect bridge to our second modern deep dive. A 20th century intellectual battle over the stable cultural and geographical identity of a nation.
So we jump now, from the Bronze Age Aegean to the modern political currents of 1938 Egypt. And this was a critical moment.
A huge turning point. After the 1936 treaty with Britain, Egypt had achieved a new degree of political autonomy, and the country was intensely focused on defining its own cultural future.
And this internal reckoning created a kind of cultural battleground.
It really did. Powerful new movements were rising, most notably the Eastern Association, or the Rabia al-Sharqiyya.
And what were they pushing for?
A radical shift. They were advocating for a complete severance of cultural ties with the West. Their goal was to emphasize a narrow, very restrictive Arabism that limited Egypt to its linguistic neighborhood.
While actively ignoring its immense ancient and Hellenic heritage.
Exactly. This reductive vision, as Taha Hussein saw it, threatened to amputate Egypt from its own history.
And this is the context in which Hussein, the revered dean of Arabic literature, wrote his explosive work, Mustaqbal al-Thaqafa fi Misr, the Future of Culture in Egypt.
Hussein's core thesis was a monumental challenge to this growing nationalism. He asserted that Egyptian culture had long transcended simplistic geographic divisions between East and West,
He insisted that Egypt does not belong purely to the Arab cultural orbit.
but rather belongs historically and intellectually to the culture of the Mediterranean al-Bahr al-Abyal al-Mutawasi, the White Middle Sea.
That is a remarkably bold claim, especially coming from the most respected figure in Arabic letters at the time. He was essentially telling his contemporaries, you are fundamentally misunderstanding who you are.
And he knew it was bold.
So how did he justify this deep Mediterranean linkage historically?
He used a rigorous historical approach, tracing Egypt's cultural engagement back millennia. He cited Alexander the Great, arguing that the Hellenistic era infused Egypt with a profoundly Greek civilizational character.
Making Alexandria one of the greatest centers of Greek thought and learning in the entire world.
For centuries. So the Greek influence wasn't some brief colonial moment. It was a defining, foundational chapter of Egyptian history.
And he didn't stop there, did he?
No, he reminded his readers that this was a two-way street, something celebrated by the ancients themselves. Figures like Herodotus proudly acknowledged the massive, profound influence of ancient Egyptian civilization on the burgeoning Greek intellect.
So Greek culture was born in part from the wisdom of Egypt.
And if Egypt contributed fundamentally to Greek culture, and Greek culture subsequently shaped the entire Western world,
then Egypt has an ancient and undeniable stake in what we call Western civilization.
it creates a foundational link that you just can't sever. And when he looked eastward, Hussein emphasized that ancient Egypt's contact with the East was geographically constrained. It was limited to the Near East Palestine, the Levant, Iraq.
Which critically are all the eastern portion of the Mediterranean basin anyway.
Precisely. Egypt was never culturally linked to the distant Far East like India or China or Japan.
And he used that geographical limitation to launch his really scathing critique of the Arabist view.
He argued that claiming Egyptians were culturally closer to Tokyo or Beijing than to Paris, Rome, or Athens was, and this is a quote, a hideous error or strange delusion.
He challenged his audience with a powerful, pragmatic question.
A logic test, he asked. Which is easier for the Egyptian mind, to understand the Chinese or Japanese man, or to understand the French or English man?
And the implied answer, that the modern Egyptian mind was demonstrably shaped by European contact, science, and governance, made the Eastern Association's claim sound, well, absurd and self-defeating. Hashtag tag 3.2 critique of language and religion as sole identity factors.
So, the proponents of Arabism, they largely based their definition of Egyptian identity on two main factors: the Arabic language and the Islamic religion.
And Hussein launched an equally powerful critique against using those as the sole determinants of a civilization.
He argued that relying exclusively on language and religion was politically naive and fundamentally insufficient to define who a people are.
He felt that true civilization requires a separation of religion and politics.
A necessary separation, yes. He felt this was a universal lesson learned by Muslims after the collapse of the Caliphate and by European Christians after the medieval era. Trying to collapse civilization back into a purely religious or linguistic category was, for him, a step backward.
The analogy he used regarding Christianity is exceptionally clarifying in this debate, I think.
It really is. He noted that Christianity originated in the East, born in Bethlehem, and yet it spread to Europe and became the dominant faith.
But adopting Christianity did not make Europe Eastern.
Not at all. Nor did it strip the European mind of its inherited Greek and Roman characteristics. The faith traveled, but the deep cultural inheritance remained.
And he applied this identical logic to Islam in Egypt.
He argued that if Christianity didn't fundamentally alter the European mind, then Islam, though adopted by Egypt, did not fundamentally alter the Egyptian intellect or strip it of the Mediterranean characteristics it had inherited over millennia.
The language and the religion were embraced, but the essential character and historical context of the civilization remained Egyptian.
Exactly. Rooted in the Mediterranean basin, identity, in his view, was defined by history and intellectual tradition, not just by creed. Hashtag tag 3.3, the danger of cultural schism.
So if the proponents of Arabism succeed in forcing the Egyptian mind to deny this Mediterranean heritage and declare itself purely Eastern, what's the ultimate price, according to Taha Hussein?
The primary danger is a self-inflicted wound, a cultural schism, which in Arabic is al-fiyam al-takofi.
This is more than just a disagreement. It sounds like an intellectual split, a kind of self-mutilation.
That's the idea. Severing the Egyptian mind from its true historical cultural roots leads to this catastrophic and defeatist notion that Egyptians are made of a different clay than Europeans.
And once you establish that fundamental belief, that you are inherently, maybe even biologically different, that opens the door to external political manipulation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This self-inflicted schism facilitates cultural arrogance from others and creates pretexts for colonialism. Hussein was deeply aware of contemporary European theories, like those popularized by Paul Valéry, which posited the East and West as these irreconcilable, opposed poles.
So by claiming Egypt was fundamentally different, made of different clay,
Egyptian nationalists were inadvertently feeding into the justification for others to treat them as perpetually alien or subordinate.
it sounds like he saw their arguments as not just wrong, but politically counterproductive and dangerously naive.
He did. He saw them as playing right into the hands of those who wished to maintain geopolitical dominance. And to counter this, he didn't just rely on historical theory, he looked at the material political reality of Egypt in 1938.
What were the real-world facts on the ground that undercut this idea of a purely Eastern Egypt?
He observed that the governance systems modern Egypt was pursuing, the framework for democratic rule, the legal structures, were demonstrably European in origin.
And not just in government.
No, the material life of the middle and upper classes, their aesthetics, their architecture, their education, all of it showed clear European influence.
He even brought up the example of rulers who are seeking tyranny.
Yes, arguing that even those figures who sought to establish authoritarian rule or absolute monarchy modeled themselves on powerful European monarchs like Louis XIV, rather than attempting to resurrect historical political systems from the Arab past, like the Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid. Because the European model, for better or worse, was the relevant frame of reference for the modern state. It was a pragmatic argument. Look at what you actually do and who you strive to be, not just the symbols you cling to. Hashtag tag 3.4 Taha Hussein's stance on Arabic language and identity.
We still have to address the paradox, though. Taha Hussein is the dean of Arabic literature. He passionately defended the purity and integrity of the formal Arabic language. He criticized the use of colloquial Arabic in literature.
And yet he explicitly denied the Arab identity of Egypt.
How do you square that circle?
This is where we need to make the clear distinction that Hussein himself insisted upon. The distinction between an acquired language and the authentic ethnicity or historical identity of a people.
So his commitment to the formal Arabic language was a commitment to its literary and intellectual power.
Not an admission that it defined the Egyptian soul as Arab.
He used a contemporary international analogy to make this distinction undeniable.
He referenced the French language. He noted that French is an official language in tens of countries across the globe. Critically, the Democratic Republic of Congo has one of the largest populations of French speakers in the world.
Yet, no reasonable person would argue that the DRC, based solely on the language spoken there, is culturally French in its identity.
Of course not. The language is a powerful vehicle, but it does not dictate the ancient roots of the people speaking it.
So for Hussein, Egyptian identity is Egyptian, pure and simple.
Tied to its profound history and its location in the Mediterranean world, he wasn't asking Egyptians to abandon Arabic. He was asking them to define their identity not as followers of a geopolitical or linguistic trend, but as heirs to a unique, geographically centered civilization that has always been a fundamental bridge between the perceived East and West.
He refused the binary choice.
He refused it completely.
And instead, he claimed Egypt's complexity as its greatest strength.
That's the entire point. His purpose was to maintain the integrity of the Egyptian character, insisting that it be defined by its long history and its intellectual engagement with the world, rather than shrinking its definition due to the geopolitical pressures of the day. Hashtag outro.
We have journeyed across 2 millennia and 2 radically different geopolitical settings, yet we've consistently explored the same central themes.
It's remarkable how they connect.
We began by charting how Homer's epics provided these complementary definitions of heroism, the brute force of Achilles, defined by death and glory in the Iliad,
And the cunning perseverance of Odysseus, defined by endurance and restoration in the Odyssey.
We followed that up by delving into the modern, forensic search for the physical home of the hero for Ithaca. We saw how this determined amateur, Robert Biddlestone, married ancient texts like Strabo's with compelling geological evidence,
Suggesting that tectonic upheaval literally shifted the ground beneath the hero's feet, obscuring the ancient location of his kingdom on what is now Cephalonia.
And finally, we pivoted to Taha Hussein's powerful intellectual manifesto from 1938, where he waged a fierce battle against the notion of a geographically and culturally reductive identity.
arguing that Egypt's true essence lay in its undeniable, profound ties to the Mediterranean world, asserting that identity is forged by history and intellect, not merely by the accident of language or religion.
And if you connect these two seemingly disparate deep dives, the shifting ground of Ithaca and the contested cultural heritage of Egypt, you see a powerful, unified narrative emerging.
They both compel us to question the stability of the anchors we rely on to define ourselves.
Think about it. The idea of home, the physical manifestation of Nostos, can be violently erased by geological accident.
And the very idea of nationhood and cultural identity, which we assume is stable, must be constantly fought for and fiercely articulated against external political pressures.
This leads us to a final provocative thought for you to take away. Is every search for home, every quest for Nostos, and every attempt to define the self ultimately a complex fusion?
A blend where verifiable, enduring historical facts, like Cephalonia's fault line or Egypt's Ptolemaic past, are constantly being woven into and sometimes obscured by purposefully constructed narratives and potentially fragile fictions.
What happens when the narrative we rely on breaks down and the ground beneath our identity shifts? That's what we're left to contemplate until our next deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
And home. Not even me.